Welcome back to Conflict of Interest, and tonight we have a special guest, Professor Lesleyanne Hawthorne of Melbourne University. Welcome, Lesleyanne.
Thank you.
Why haven't they got the Aboriginals doing this?
Okay, well, you've got difficulties constraining one ethnic group in Australia who happen to be citizens to move where you want them to work.
What, legal difficulties?
Absolutely.
Under the Constitution?
Relative to other groups, the big attraction to governments of temporary migrants is you can make it a condition of their visa that they work and live where you want them to be.
Why can't we make it a condition of the Aboriginal dole payments?
I think it's extremely difficult to do it with one particular group. You could take the surfers in Queensland, you could take any other cater group who have got a high unemployment level. Why Aborigines?
Well, because they're the ones that need employment, probably more than anyone else in this country.
Indeed, but if you're going to make a condition of their employment that they are displaced from their communities and work in fairly marginalised contexts, you've got a legal problem to do that.
Why?
Because you cannot constrain citizens to work against their will on a particular ethnic basis when you can't constrain other groups.
Because it breaches their human rights, does it?
You can't do it. You can't do it at law.
Then aren't we breaching the human rights of the incoming
workers? Let's get some details of this.
Aren't we?
Let's get some details.
Are we breaching the human rights?
Peter.
Well, just a simple question.
Hang on.
Are we breaching the human rights of the incoming workers?
Well, you're about to
Nobody
find out.
wants to answer.
You're about to find out.
So
if you just be
basically,
quiet.
if governments run both permanent migration schemes and temporary migration schemes, the difference between them is when they're temporary migrants, you can make it a selection condition that they work where they're needed under specified conditions. So if you take, for example...
Well, they work where they're directed.
Just a moment. If you
they work where they're directed,
just a
not
moment.
just needed.
Hang on, Peter. Hang on.
If you take the current proposed scheme, you're looking at a pilot program, 2,500 people being selected, working 7 months in the year in Australia in 2 locations basically, the fruit picking areas of New South Wales and also of Victoria. The employers are paying half the return fare, the people will self-pay the other return fare, and they've got to be defined award wages. Now they're agreeing by definition to those terms and conditions at the point of accepting the applications to go into Australia.
Yes, but what's it for? Are they to be, as you say, working where they're needed, or as I say, working where they're directed?
No, it's to be both where they're needed and where they're directed.
So they're told where to work?
Absolutely,
Isn't
and that is their
a breach of their
condition of
human
entry.
rights?
Not in the least,
Why not?
because
you come in on the basis of a particular visa.
It's still a breach of their human
No,
rights.
no, it's not.
They
Because
should be able to work.
You're not.
They should be able to take another job if they want to take it.
Well,
so
they
can't take other employment.
If
is that right?
Peter, if they stay in the country and their visa changes, they can very well do that. That's the way migration works.
But on this 7 months, they can't work anywhere else.
No.
A condition of their employment is they may be able to change who their employer is,
but
to remain legal on that visa category,
they have to work
they
as
can
directed.
have ascribed work areas and conditions. But the issue is, if we come to the Aboriginal example you were giving, if someone's born Aboriginal in Australia in a remote community, a condition of their citizenship in Australia was not that they, amongst any other group, take defined areas of work wherever the pickers might be required. However, the Pacific Islanders who are being selected are people whose governments want them to take this work.
But there's no conditions on the citizenship for people born in Australia.
They have signed up for this work in the locations prescribed. They have entered an agreement.
The Aboriginals are citizens because they're born here, full stop.
Absolutely.
But they are also getting massive social service payments as Aboriginal, special payments from the taxpayer.
But equally, you can define a whole range of other groups who are highly dependent on welfare.
I think we should put barristers in there.
I'm not interested in other groups. I'm concerned why the most underprivileged group in Australia who've got massive numbers who don't work.
Peter.
Well, can't they do this as a cooperative scheme?
Peter, of course you've got all these sorts of schemes which are already in operation. Go up into North Queensland and have a look.
Why isn't the government saying we are going to speak to the Aboriginal communities and we're going to fly these Aboriginals?
What do you think the government's doing?
They're not doing it.
Let's talk about this globally. There are a number of these schemes around the globe.
Yeah, let's not talk about Australia.
Oh, hang on, Peter. Let's talk about it globally. There are a number of these schemes around the globe. Which is the most successful in your view?
Okay.
Has any country got the model right?
Hong Kong.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that many countries need these schemes. So if you look at fertility rates, Australia's down to 1.8, but if you look at Germany, it's down to 1.3, like Japan. So there is a huge shortage, which is growing rapidly, of people who are young, strong and willing to work in agricultural work.
But it's more than that.
Just a moment.
Hang on, Peter, hang on, Peter.
It's got to do with people. A lot
Peter.
of locals won't do the dirty work. So the French have the Algerians, the Hong Kongese have the Filipinos. So you've got work which is regarded as not being, if you can get cheap foreign workers to do it. I mean, there's that element too.
And that's the attraction.
And we're not actually bringing these islanders over to be brain surgeons.
So
We're
Australia is
bringing them over
replicating exactly the tactic used by many developed countries to meet essential workforce needs in the lowly regarded areas. Exactly.
That Australians don't really
and that
want
has
to do.
always been the case.
And that's the why, is it not correct that the reason why they can't get people to do this is it's seen as being unpopular work?
Absolutely.
So we get coloured people from the islands in to do it.
Coloured people from the islands are willing to do that work.
Isn't that a bit of a problem? I mean, I think it's an
What do you say the work shouldn't be done?
It's like getting your Nikes made in the Philippines.
Can I just say this is a regional issue? Our region happens to be where there are people who are of different racial origins. But if you look at Germany, for example, it brings in 300,000 Poles per year because its region is Eastern Europe.
And
it's where there are wage differentials that give people motivation to come. Well, the Turks are the old guest workers.
Yeah,
that stopped in 1973. And indeed, there are problems about guest worker schemes, and the aphorism is there is nothing more permanent than temporary migration.
That's right.
That's why this is a trial scheme at the moment.
Leslie, the US we hear a lot about, and we hear a lot about Latino workers.
Yes.
And if you go to the US, it's a very conflicted issue. I mean, John McCain, for example, is in favour of a more liberalised scheme.
Yes.
Many Democrats are not.
But mostly they're illegals, aren't they?
Well, it's a mixture of people who are
the vast majority is illegals.
It's a mixture of illegals and people who are under a program.
But mostly
do you think the US will move towards regularising all Latino migrants? I mean, as been suggested in the past by McCain.
Well, that was rejected by Congress late last year, and so it's a very contentious issue at the moment. There's an estimated about 11 million illegal Mexicans, for example, in the US, and there are many people on both sides of Congress who believe it has to be regularised. But at the moment, the negative views about that has prevailed.
What's the numbers for the guest workers from Mexico? If it's 11 million illegals, how many guest workers?
I don't know the actual number of those.
I mean, it's not going to
no, I'm not going to estimate it because I don't know it.
Million.
It's a very significant scheme, but it also is accompanied by broad illegal movements.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the research about guest worker movements says you have to follow certain principles if you want to get out of it what your government seeks. And the first thing is you've got to have strong compliance measures with both the employers, so there aren't abuses.
Does that mean you'll stop?
No, she won't stop. She's a guest.
You need compliance of employers. You need to have people who are available and able to earn enough money to make it worth their while.
We're not going to have that problem here because we're not going to get drift from over from the islands.
Well, we may well get drifts if...
Well, it's going to be pretty difficult
but
for
let's just say we're looking at 2,500
It's a very small program in Australia.
It's tiny.
It's tiny.
Yes.
How many would you, being reasonable, how many would you estimate of the first 2,500 would disappear into the community? Greg said he'd be comfortable with 500.
Well, can I ask you in turn, which group do you think would be at the highest risk of overstaying in Australia, of all the people who arrive here?
I think that's a loaded question. And
what's the answer,
seeing that you're a professor,
I'd like
we'd like your answer.
Anglo-Celtics.
Yes, it's the British who
the
are
British,
most
of
all the temporary people who come to Australia. It's the British who are most likely to overstay.
Always blame the Anglo-Celtics.
And I think it's very important to keep that in mind when you're talking about potential island
we know that the British
built this country, so I'm not really very fussed about that.
No, I
and I've got British
I'd
descent.
say,
Well,
Peter,
I don't know where you come from, but I'm an Aussie.
Last week, on this program, he said that China was fantastic. And that he thought that the only way to control 1.7 billion people was to have authoritarian government. So you should quite like the idea of moving people around the country.
I think it's shades of Stalin and also Tsarist Russia,
not
where
China.
People. Because where people could only move around the country.
Lesleyanne, one more question before you go. are we likely to see this program extended in the future? 2,500 is a very small number.
Yeah, I think it is likely to be extended.
And where
so they'll
to?
monitor it carefully. They'll look at avoiding abuses if they can. They'll try and make it feasible. People are certainly talking about Western Australia having an agreement with East Timor.
Where to? East Timor could be added?
Yes.
What about Indonesia and the Philippines? Are they viable?
I think they're perfectly viable.
Okay.
Yes.
Because the Filipinos, as you know, a huge number in Hong Kong.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, there's no shortage of people on our doorstep who could do this.
We've got to wind it up. Lesleyanne, thank you for coming in and being a fantastic combatant. And you did a great job. No, seriously, thanks for coming onto the program. It's a fascinating issue and no doubt one that we'll be returning to. We're going to a break now, and when we come back, we'll wrap this issue up.